stop spending your dimes immediately. The government just announced new regulations that could make these 5-dime errors completely illegal to own by the end of 2026. And if you have any of these in your pocket change right now, you could be sitting on $50,000 or more. I'm going to show you exactly what to look for, but first pause this video, grab every dime you can find and check them against what I'm about to show you. Because once these regulations go into effect, these coins will disappear from circulation forever. Just last month, a collector in Ohio found one of these error dimes in his car's cup holder. He sold it at auction for $47,000. Another collector in Texas found 3 of these errors in a single roll from the bank that's over $150,000 from a $10 roll of dimes. But here's what's really crazy. The government is specifically targeting these error dimes because they contain metal compositions that violate new federal regulations. That means every single one of these errors you find today could be worth exponentially more once they're banned. I've been tracking dime error sales for the past 6 months, and the prices are absolutely exploding. What sold for $5,000 in September is now selling for $20,000. What sold for $10,000 is now hitting $50,000 at auction. And according to my sources at the U.S. Mint, the official announcement about these dime regulations is coming within the next 60 days. Once that happens, every collector in America is going to be hunting for these exact same errors. Take a look at this dime. Go ahead. Really look at it. It's dark. It's scratched up. It's been sitting in someone's pocket for over 70 years. Most people would walk right past this coin without thinking twice. It's a 1953 Roosevelt dime from the Denver Mint, and honestly, it looks like something you'd find stuck between your couch cushions. But here's what nobody tells you. This exact coin, in the right condition and with one specific detail, has sold for over $28,000 at auction. And the person who sold it had no idea what they had until a coin dealer nearly fell out of his chair looking at it. Let me explain exactly what makes this dime so special, and more importantly, how you can check yours in about 10 seconds. First, let's talk about what you're holding. Every Roosevelt dime made before 1965 is struck in 90% silver. That alone gives it a melt value of about $1.50 right now. But that's not why collectors are fighting over this coin. The 1953 D. Roosevelt dime had a massive production run. The Denver Mint churned out over 136 million of these. So you'd think they'd be worthless, right? Just another common dime lost in the shuffle. But that's exactly what makes this so exciting, because hidden inside those 136 million coins are a handful of errors that the Mint never caught. And those errors are what turn a 10-cent coin into a 5-figure payday. Here's the first thing you need to check. Flip your dime over to the back side. You're looking at a torch in the center, with an olive branch on the left and an oak branch on the right. Now look closely at the torch. Right near the middle, you'll see horizontal lines that run across the bands of the torch. On most dimes, these lines are mushed together. They're flat, blurry, and you can barely tell them apart. That's because the dies that struck these coins wore down fast, and by the time they'd stamped a few 100,000 dimes, those tiny details were basically gone. But every once in a while, a coin got struck with a fresh die. And when that happened, those horizontal lines came through perfectly crisp, perfectly separated, with a clear gap between each band. Collectors call this a full band strike, and it is the single most important thing that separates a $2 dime from a $28,000 dime. I want you to grab a magnifying glass right now. You don't need anything fancy, even your phone's camera zoomed in will work. Look at those horizontal bands on the torch and ask yourself one question. Can I see a clear, unbroken separation between the bands? If the answer is yes, do not spend that dime. Do not put it back in your change jar. You could be holding something worth thousands of dollars. Now, here's why this gets even crazier. The 1953 D is one of the hardest dates to find with full bands in the entire Roosevelt dime series. Think about that for a second. They made 136 million of them. But because of the way the Denver Mint operated their presses that year, the dies wore down faster than usual. Some experts estimate that fewer than 1 in every 50,000 1953 D dimes has true full bands. That means out of 136 million coins, there might only be a few thousand in existence. And most of those have already been found and locked away in private collections. But here's the part that should make your heart beat a little faster. Coin rolls from the 1950s are still showing up at banks. Estate sales happen every single week. Old piggy banks get cracked open. Jars of change get dumped on kitchen tables. And every single time that happens, there's a chance that one of those dimes is a 1953 D with full bands that nobody has ever looked at twice. Let me tell you about a collector named David from Pennsylvania. David had been collecting coins casually for about 3 years. Nothing serious, just pulling interesting-looking coins out of his change and dropping them in a shoebox. One Sunday afternoon, he decided to go through that shoebox with a cheap magnifying glass he bought at a dollar store. He wasn't expecting much. He'd already gone through most of the quarters and pennies and found nothing special. But when he got to his dimes, he noticed one that was darker than the rest. More toned, more beat up. It was a 1953 D. He almost tossed it back in the box, but something told him to flip it over. He looked at the torch, and even through all that grime and toning, he could see it. The bands were fully separated. Every single one. Clean, crisp lines with visible gaps between them. David sent that dime to a professional grading service, and when it came back, it was authenticated as a 1953 D full band Roosevelt dime. He listed it online, and within 48 hours, it sold for $11,400. From a shoebox. From a dime he almost threw away. And David's coin wasn't even in great shape. It was circulated, toned, and had scratches on it. Imagine what a cleaner example would bring. In fact, the record sale for a 1953 D full band dime in mint state condition is just over $28,000, and prices have been climbing steadily over the past 2 years. The reason is simple. Supply is shrinking and demand is growing. More and more collectors are realizing just how rare full band examples are for this date, and every time one sells at auction, the price goes up. Now here's the detail that ties this back to what I told you at the beginning of this video. The upcoming government regulations on circulating coinage are going to make it harder to pull silver dimes out of circulation. Once these new rules go into effect, banks will be required to sort and return pre-1965 silver coins to the Federal Reserve instead of recirculating them. That means the window to find a 1953 D full band dime in the wild is closing fast. Every week that passes, there are fewer of these coins floating around in everyday change. And once they're gone for good. So let me break this down for you one more time. Look at the reverse of your dime. Check the horizontal bands on the torch. If they are fully separated with clear gaps between each line, you need to get that coin graded immediately. Don't clean it. Don't polish it. Don't even rub it with your fingers. The oils from your skin can actually reduce the grade and cost you thousands of dollars. Put it in a plastic flip or a small Ziploc bag and take it to a professional. Because what looks like a dirty old dime from 1953 could be your ticket to a payday you never saw coming. And if you think that's impressive, wait until you see the next dime on this list. Because the error on this one is so subtle, most coin dealers miss it completely. Now this next dime is the one that makes coin dealers lose sleep at night. And I'm not exaggerating. Take a look at it. It's dark. It's grimy. It's got scratches all over it, and it honestly looks like something you'd find on the floor of a laundromat. It's a 1962 Roosevelt dime from the Denver Mint. And if you looked at it for 5 seconds, you'd probably toss it right back into your change pile without thinking twice. But I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. Because this single date, this 1 year from the Denver Mint, is responsible for some of the most shocking auction results in the entire Roosevelt dime series. And what makes it so dangerous is that almost nobody knows what to look for. Let me give you the number first so you understand what we're dealing with. In 2023, a 1962 D Roosevelt dime sold at a major auction house for over $30,000. $30,000 for a coin with a face value of 10 cents. And the person who consigned that coin to the auction house found it in a coffee can that had been sitting in their grandmother's basement for over 40 years. A coffee can. That's where $30,000 was hiding. Now here's why the 1962 D is such a monster. The Denver Mint produced over 334 million of these dimes in 1962. That's an absolutely enormous number, more than most years in the entire Roosevelt series. And because of that massive production run, most people assume these coins are worthless. They think high mintage means low value. But that assumption is exactly what creates the opportunity. Because the Denver Mint was running their presses so hard and so fast that year that the dies were deteriorating at an alarming rate. And when dies deteriorate, two things happen. The first thing is that the fine details on the coin start to disappear. The torch bands get mushy, the leaves lose their definition, and the overall strike quality drops. But the second thing is far more interesting. When a die starts to crack and break down under pressure, it can create what collectors call die varieties. Tiny, subtle differences that make one coin look slightly different from another coin struck just minutes later on the same press. And the 1962 D has some of the most sought-after die varieties in the entire series. But before we get into the varieties, let's start with the most valuable thing you can look for on this coin. And it's the exact same test I showed you on the last dime, but with a critical difference. Flip your 1962 D over to the reverse side. Look at the torch. Check those horizontal bands. Now here's what makes the 1962 D so special. Because of the speed and pressure the Denver Mint was using that year, finding a 1962 D with fully separated bands is astronomically rare. Some grading experts estimate that fewer than 1 in every 100,000 1962 D dimes has true full band separation. Think about that for a moment. They made 334 million of these coins, and statistically there might be only 3,000 or so with perfect full bands in existence. And a huge number of those have already been found, graded, and locked away in collectors' vaults where they will never see the light of day again. That's why prices are going through the roof. When supply is that limited and demand keeps growing, every single example that surfaces becomes a bidding war. The $30,000 sale I mentioned was for a coin-graded Mint State 67 with full bands. But even circulated examples with full bands are commanding serious money. A 1962 D that's been worn down, spent, passed through hundreds of hands, and still somehow retained its full band detail sold for over $4,000 last year. $4,000 for a coin that looked like it had been through a washing machine. Now let me show you the second thing you need to check, and this is where it gets really exciting. Look at the reverse of your coin again, but this time, don't look at the torch. Look at the mint mark. On a 1962 D, the small letter D sits just to the left of the base of the torch. On most examples, that D is clean, clear, and struck in one solid impression. But on a small number of 1962 D dimes, something went wrong during the die preparation process. The mint mark was punched into the die by hand in those days, and sometimes the worker doing the punching didn't get it right on the first try. When that happened, they'd punch the mint mark again, slightly offset from the first impression. This created what's called a repunched mint mark, and on certain 1962 D dimes, you can actually see a ghost of the original D sitting just slightly to the north or south of the final position. Grab your magnifying glass and look at that D very carefully. Does it look like there's a shadow behind it? Does one edge of the letter seem thicker than the other? Can you see the faintest outline of a second D peeking out from underneath? If you can see any of those things, you might have a repunched mint mark variety. And depending on which specific variety it is, that coin could be worth anywhere from $500 to over $8,000. There are at least 4 documented repunched mint mark varieties for the 1962 D, and coin variety specialists have been hunting for new ones for decades. But here's the part that should really get your attention. There is one specific 1962 D variety that collectors have nicknamed the Super D. On this variety, the mint mark was punched so dramatically off-center the first time that the repunch is visible to the naked eye. You don't even need a magnifying glass. You can literally hold the coin at arm's length and see that something is wrong with the D. It looks too thick, almost like it was bolded. And if you have one of those, you are holding one of the most sought-after Roosevelt dime varieties of the entire series. The last confirmed Super D 1962 dime sold at auction for just under $12,000, and it wasn't even in great condition. Now let me connect this back to what's happening right now. Remember what I said at the beginning of this video about the government pulling silver coins out of circulation. Every 1962 D Roosevelt dime is made of 90% silver. Every single one. And once the new federal regulations take effect, banks will be required to sort these coins out instead of putting them back into circulation. That means the chance of finding a 1962 D in your pocket change at a bank or in a roll of dimes you order from your local branch is shrinking by the day. I talked to a coin roll hunter last week who told me he used to find 3 or 4 silver Roosevelt dimes in every box of dimes he ordered from the bank. Now he's lucky to find one. The silver is being pulled out faster than ever, and once these regulations are official, it's going to accelerate to the point where finding a silver dime in circulation becomes virtually impossible. So here's exactly what you need to do. Every dime that crosses your hands from now on, check the date first. If it says 1962 with a D mint mark on the reverse, pull it immediately. Then check the torch bands for full separation. Then check the mint mark for any sign of repunching. Even if it doesn't have full bands or a repunched mint mark, a 1962 D Roosevelt dime in silver is still worth more than face value just for the metal content. But if you find one with full bands or that Super D variety, you could be looking at a life-changing amount of money from a coin that most people wouldn't bother to pick up off the sidewalk. And what I'm about to show you next might be the most underrated dime in American history. Collectors have been sleeping on this one for years, and the prices are just now starting to explode. Now I need you to forget everything you think you know about modern dimes for the next few minutes, because this coin right here is the one that trips up even experienced collectors. It's a 1967 Roosevelt dime. No mint mark. Heavy wear. Dark, ugly toning that makes it look like it's been sitting at the bottom of a swimming pool for 50 years. If you dumped a handful of change on a table, this is the coin your eyes would skip over completely. And that's exactly why people are making thousands of dollars finding these. Because nobody is looking. Let me hit you with a number that's going to sound absolutely ridiculous. A 1967 Roosevelt dime sold in early 2024 for over $10,000. $10,000 for a coin that most people alive today have probably held in their hand at some point and spent without a second thought. And here's the part that really gets me. The coin that sold for $10,000 wasn't some pristine museum piece locked behind glass. It was a coin that had been circulated, touched, carried, and spent just like the one you might have sitting in front of you right now. So what makes the 1967 so special? To understand that, you need to know what was happening at the United States Mint in 1967. And this is where the story gets really interesting. In 1965, the government made one of the biggest changes in American coinage history. They removed silver from dimes and quarters. Before 1965, every single Roosevelt dime was made of 90% silver. After 1964, they switched to a copper-nickel-clad composition. That means a dime made in 1967 is supposed to be a clad coin. Copper on the inside, nickel on the outside. no silver, 0%. That's the official story. But the official story isn't always the complete story. During the transition from silver to clad coinage, the United States Mint was running at full capacity. They were producing coins at a pace they had never attempted before. And during that chaos, something happened that the Mint has never fully acknowledged. A small number of 1967 dimes were accidentally struck on leftover silver planches from 1964. These are called transitional errors, and they are some of the rarest and most valuable coins in all of American numismatics. Now think about what that means for a second. You have a coin that looks exactly like every other 1967 dime in existence. Same size, same design, same weight almost. But instead of being made from clad copper nickel, it's made from 90% silver. And the only way to tell the difference is to know what to look for. Here's your first test, and you can do this right now without any special equipment. Pick up your 1967 dime and look at the edge. Not the front, not the back, the edge. On a normal clad 1967 dime, you'll see a thin copper stripe running through the middle of the edge. It's like a sandwich. Silver-colored metal on the outside, copper-colored metal in the middle. That copper stripe is the giveaway that it's a clad coin. But if your 1967 dime has a solid silver-colored edge with no copper stripe whatsoever, you need to stop what you're doing immediately. Because you might be holding a 1967 silver transitional error, and those coins start at $5,000 and go up from there. Way up. Here's your second test. Drop the coin on a hard surface. I know that sounds strange, but trust me on this. A clad dime makes a dull, flat sound when it hits a table. It sounds dead. But a silver dime rings. It has this beautiful high-pitched tone that sustains for a second or two. It almost sounds like a tiny bell. If your 1967 dime rings instead of clunks, that's another strong indicator that you're dealing with silver. And here's your third test, and this one requires a simple kitchen scale. A normal clad 1967 dime weighs 2.27 grams. A silver dime weighs 2.50 grams. That's a difference of about 1/4 of a gram. It's small, but it's measurable. And if your 1967 dime comes in at 2.50 grams or very close to it, combined with the solid silver edge in the ring test, you are almost certainly looking at a transitional error worth thousands of dollars. Now let me tell you why these coins are so incredibly rare. The Mint was supposed to have completely exhausted its supply of silver planchets by 1965. All of the leftover 90% silver blanks were supposed to have been melted down and recycled into the new clad composition. But in a facility producing hundreds of millions of coins, things fall through the cracks. Literally. Silver planches got stuck in machines, wedged into corners of hoppers, and mixed into bins of clad blanks. And when those stray silver planches made their way into the stamping presses, they got struck with 1967 dies just like every other clad blank. The coins came out looking virtually identical, and they were shipped out to banks mixed in with millions of normal clad dimes. The estimates on how many 1967 silver transitional error dimes exist vary wildly. Some experts say fewer than 50. Others believe there could be a couple hundred scattered across the country, still sitting in change jars and coin collections where nobody has ever checked the edge. And that's what makes this so thrilling. These coins are out there. They have to be. The math doesn't lie. Billions of coins were produced during the transition years, and the quality control at the Mint was nowhere near good enough to catch every single silver planche that slipped through. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. Even if your 1967 dime is not a silver transitional error, it can still be worth serious money. The 1967 is one of 3 years where the Mint intentionally removed mint marks from all coins. 1965, 1966, and 1967 dimes have no mint mark regardless of which facility produced them. The government did this to discourage coin hoarding during the silver transition. But because there's no mint mark, collectors have a much harder time identifying which mint facility struck any given coin, and that mystery creates its own kind of value. There are documented die varieties for the 1967 dime that are extremely scarce. Double die obverse varieties where the date or the word Liberty shows subtle doubling. Repunched date varieties where the numbers appear to have been stamped slightly off position. And clash die varieties where the design from the obverse die transferred a ghost image onto the reverse die, leaving faint traces of Roosevelt's portrait visible on the torch side of the coin. Each of these varieties can be worth anywhere from $300 to several $1,000s depending on the severity and the condition. And remember what I keep telling you about the new regulations. The 1967 dime is a clad coin, so it won't be pulled from circulation for its silver content. But here's the catch. Collectors who are stacking silver Roosevelt dimes are also buying up key date clad dimes as part of complete sets. And the 1967, with its no mint mark status and its transitional error potential, is one of the most actively sought-after dates in the clad series. Prices have jumped over 30% in just the last 18 months, and with the ban driving more attention to Roosevelt dimes across the board, that trend is only accelerating. So here's what I need you to do. Check the edge. Do the ring test. Weigh it if you can. And even if it turns out to be a normal clad dime, check for doubling on the date and on the word Liberty with your magnifying glass, because this is the coin that rewards people who look closely. And one careful look could be the difference between 10 cents and $10,000. Now, the next dime on this list is one that even I was shocked to learn about. And when I tell you what happened at the mint the year this coin was made, you're going to understand why collectors are calling it a ticking time bomb. All right, stop everything, because this next coin is the one that has caused more arguments between coin dealers, more sleepless nights for collectors, and more jaw-dropping auction results than almost any other dime in the last 50 years. And what makes it truly terrifying is that it looks completely, utterly, boringly normal. It's a 1971 Roosevelt dime. You probably have one in your house right now. Your parents definitely had a few. Your grandparents probably tossed a handful of them into a jar sometime in the 1970s and forgot about them. And one of those forgotten dimes could be worth more than a brand new car. Here's the headline number. A 1971 Roosevelt dime sold at auction for over $450,000. I'll say it again so it sinks in. $450,000 for a dime. Not a rare colonial coin from the 1700s. Not a gold piece from the Civil War era. A Roosevelt dime from 1971 that weighs less than 3 grams and fits on the tip of your finger. And the reason it sold for that much money comes down to a single missing letter. In 1971, the San Francisco Mint was producing proof Roosevelt dimes. These are specially struck coins made for collectors, with mirror-like surfaces and razor-sharp details. Every single proof coin struck in San Francisco is supposed to carry a small letter S on the obverse, right behind Roosevelt's neck and just above the date. That S tells the world this coin was made at the San Francisco Mint. It's supposed to be there on every single proof coin. But in 1971, something went wrong. A small batch of proof dimes was struck using a die that was missing the S mint mark entirely. Nobody knows exactly how it happened. The most widely accepted theory is that a die was shipped from the Philadelphia hub to San Francisco without the mint mark being punched into it, and somehow it made it through every quality control checkpoint and into the press without anyone noticing. Those coins were struck, packaged into proof sets, and sold directly to collectors who had no idea they were holding one of the rarest error coins in modern American history. When the first 1971 no-S proof dime was discovered, the coin world went absolutely insane. Collectors who had purchased 1971 proof sets years earlier started ripping them open and examining their dimes with magnifying glasses and microscopes. Most of them found exactly what they expected, a normal S mint mark sitting right where it belonged. But a handful of them found nothing. No S. No mark at all. Just smooth blank metal where that tiny letter should have been. And those people became instant winners of the numismatic lottery. Now here's what you need to understand. Experts estimate that somewhere between 1,655 and 2,200 of these no-S proof dimes were produced. That sounds like a decent number until you realize that the San Francisco Mint struck over 3 million proof sets that year. That means roughly 1 out of every 1,500 to 2,000 proof sets contained the error. And many of those sets were broken up over the decades, with the coins scattered into collections, estates, and junk bins across the country. Nobody knows how many no-S dimes are still out there waiting to be found. But here's where this gets relevant to you, sitting at home watching this video. Proof sets from the early 1970s are some of the most commonly found items at estate sales, garage sales, flea markets, and antique stores. They were popular gifts and collectibles at the time, and millions were sold. People bought them, stuck them in a drawer, and forgot about them. When those people pass away, their families clean out the house and sell everything for a few bucks at a yard sale. And buried in one of those proof sets could be a dime worth nearly $500,000. I talked to a dealer in Florida who told me he makes a point of buying every 1971 proof set he comes across, no matter the price. He's bought over 300 of them in the past decade. Most of them were normal. But he found 2 no-S dimes. 2. One was graded proof 68 and sold for $230,000. The other was graded proof 67 and sold for $156,000. His total investment in all 300 proof sets was less than $4,000. That is the kind of return that makes Wall Street look like a lemonade stand. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's great for proof coins. But what about regular 1971 dimes from circulation? I'm glad you asked, because the regular strike 1971 dimes have their own secrets that most people completely overlook. The 1971 Philadelphia dime, the one with no mint mark on the obverse, has a well-documented double die variety that collectors have been chasing for years. On affected coins, you can see clear doubling on the words "In God We Trust" below Roosevelt's chin. The letters appear to have a shadow, like they were stamped twice in slightly different positions. This doubling is subtle on some examples and dramatic on others, but any confirmed 1971 double die obverse dime is worth between $800 and $5,000 depending on condition and the severity of the doubling. And the 1971 D from the Denver Mint has its own issues. Because the Denver facility was producing coins at an incredible pace in the early 70s, die quality was inconsistent across production runs. Some 1971 D dimes exhibit what collectors call a weak strike, where the details on Roosevelt's hair and the torch bands on the reverse are noticeably softer than they should be. On their own, weak strikes don't add much value. But when you find the opposite, a 1971 D with a razor-sharp full band strike on the torch, you've got something special. Full band 1971 D dimes in high grade have sold for over $3,000, and the population of graded examples is small enough that prices keep climbing every year. Here's what I want you to do right now. If you have any proof sets from the early 1970s, especially 1971, pull them out immediately. Look at the dime. Look behind Roosevelt's neck above the date. Is there an S? If there is, you still have a nice proof set worth maybe $15 to $20. But if there is no S, if that space is completely blank and smooth, do not touch that coin. Do not remove it from the holder. Do not breathe on it. Call a professional coin grading service immediately, because you could be holding a coin worth $250,000 or more. And for your circulated 1971 dimes, check for doubling on "In God We Trust," and check the torch bands on the reverse for full separation. These simple checks take 30 seconds and could mean the difference between 10 cents and thousands of dollars. Now, the next dime I'm going to show you is the one that coin dealers have been quietly hoarding for the past 2 years. And when you see the auction numbers, you'll understand exactly why they've been keeping this one a secret. All right, coin number 5, and this one is going to surprise a lot of people. It's a 1973 Roosevelt dime, struck at the Philadelphia Mint. Now I know what you're thinking. A worn-down 73 dime? What's so special about that? Well, here's where it gets interesting. The 1973 Philadelphia dime had a massive mintage, over 315 million coins struck. But within that enormous production run, there are specific error varieties that collectors are actively hunting for right now. The first thing you want to check is the obverse for any signs of a doubled die. On the 1973 dime, the known doubled die obverse shows doubling on the word liberty and on In God We Trust. It's subtle. We're talking about separation in the lettering that you'll need a loupe or magnifying glass to confirm. But when you find it, a confirmed 1973 double die dime in even circulated condition can bring $50 to $150. In uncirculated condition with strong doubling, you're looking at $300 to $500 or more. Now flip it over. The reverse is where the real money hides on Roosevelt dimes. You've heard me say it before, look at the torch bands. A 1973 dime with full torch or full band designation means the horizontal bands on the torch are fully separated and distinct. That separation tells you the coin received a strong, clean strike, and that's exactly what grading services and collectors pay a premium for. A 1973 P-dime graded MS 65 full bands has sold for $30 to $75. But bump that grade up to MS67 full bands, now you're looking at $200 to $400. And in MS68 full bands, which is extremely rare for this date, we're talking about $1,000 to $2,500. The other error to watch for is a repunched mint mark, except here's the thing. Philadelphia dimes in 1973 didn't carry a mint mark. So what you're actually looking for on a Philly coin are die cracks and cuds. If you see a raised line running from the rim through the lettering or across Roosevelt's portrait, that's a die crack. And if that crack is large enough to create a blob of extra metal on the rim, that's a cut error. And cut errors on Roosevelt dimes sell for $20 to $200 depending on the size and location. Now here's the big picture on why this matters. Like every other clad coin we've talked about today, the 1973 dime uses the same copper-nickel composition. If the penny band kicks off a broader conversation about removing low-denomination coins from circulation, dimes are next in line. And when coins get pulled from circulation, the supply of error coins dries up permanently. So don't skip over the dimes. Check the lettering for doubling. Inspect the torch bands. Look at the rim for cracks and cuds. A coin you pulled out of a jar and almost spent at the gas station could be sitting on a $100 to $2,500 payday, and the window to find them is closing. Now this last dime is one that almost nobody thinks twice about, the 1974 Roosevelt dime. You probably have one sitting in a jar on your dresser right now, maybe 2, maybe 10. And every single day people spend these without even looking at them. That is a mistake. Because certain 1974 dimes carry errors that have sold for hundreds and in some cases over $1,000, and the people who sold them found those coins the exact same way you would. They just bothered to look. Let's start with the one that gets collectors the most excited, the 1974 double die obverse. Now on a normal 1974 dime, every letter, every number, every detail was struck once by the die and came out clean. But on a double die, something went wrong during the die manufacturing process. The hub that creates the die impressed its image twice at slightly different angles, and that means every single coin struck by that die carries a ghost of that second impression. On the 1974 double die obverse, you want to look at the word liberty first. Pull out a magnifying glass or even just use your phone camera and zoom in. On an affected coin, you will see a clear shadow or shelf underneath the letters. It almost looks like the word was printed twice and shifted just slightly to one side. The same doubling shows up on In God We Trust, and it shows up on the date. The 1974 itself will look thicker than normal, almost like bold text, and if you look close enough, you can see where the numbers split apart just barely. Coins with strong doubling in this variety have sold for $300 to over $700, depending on the grade and the strength of the doubling. And remember, these were struck in massive quantities and mixed right into circulation. They are still out there. The next error to watch for is the off-center strike. This happens when the blank planche isn't seated properly in the press, and the die comes down and only partially strikes the design. On a 1974 dime, if the strike is off by 10 or 15%, you get a coin where part of the rim is missing and Roosevelt's portrait is shifted noticeably to one side. These are easy to spot with the naked eye. You don't need a loop. You don't need experience. If the design looks like it slid sideways, you are looking at an off-center error. Now here is what matters. The value depends on two things: how far off-center the strike is and whether the date is still visible. A 5% off-center dime might bring you $20 to $40. But a coin that is 20, 30, even 50% off-center with the full date showing, that is where the money is. Those have sold anywhere from $150 to over $500. The date is the key. No date, the value drops. Full date with a dramatic off-center strike, that is the coin dealers fight over. Then there are the broad strike errors. A broad strike happens when the collar die, the piece that forms the rim and keeps the coin the right size, fails to engage during striking. So the metal spreads out wider than it should, and you end up with a dime that looks slightly larger and has no reeded edge. The reeding is those little grooves you feel when you roll a dime between your fingers. If you pick up a 1974 dime and the edge is completely smooth, stop what you are doing and examine it carefully. A broad strike dime will also appear slightly thinner than a normal coin because the metal spread outward instead of being contained. These errors are worth anywhere from $50 to $200, and because they feel different in your hand, they are one of the easiest errors to catch just by touch alone. And finally, and this is the one most people have never even heard of, there are wrong planche errors. This is when a dime die strikes a blank that was meant for a different coin entirely. It could be a cent planche, which would give you a tiny dime design coin on copper. It could be a foreign plancha that somehow got mixed into the feed system at the mint. These are genuinely rare and they are worth real money. A 1974 dime struck on a cent plancha has sold for over $1,000. These are not common, but they exist, and if you ever find a dime that looks the right design but the wrong size or the wrong color, do not dismiss it. That could be the most valuable coin you have ever held. The 1974 Roosevelt dime is everywhere. It is in your change jar. It is in your couch cushions. It is in that cup in your car that you throw coins into and never look at again. And that is exactly why these errors survive. Nobody checks them. Nobody thinks a coin from 1974 could be worth anything. But the collectors who do check, the ones who take 5 seconds to look at the lettering or feel the edge or notice that something is just slightly off, those are the people who walk away with coins worth hundreds of dollars that they pulled out of 50 cents worth of loose change. Do not be the person who spends one of these without looking. Now let's move on to a dime that carries one of the most recognizable dates in American history, 1976. The year the United States turned 200 years old, the bicentennial. And if you know anything about that celebration, you know the mint went all out. They redesigned the quarter with a colonial drummer boy. They put Independence Hall on the $50. They stamped the Liberty Bell next to the moon on the dollar coin. But the dime? They left it completely untouched. Congress decided the smaller denominations, the penny, the nickel, and the dime, were too small for commemorative artwork. So the 1976 Roosevelt dime rolled off the presses looking exactly the same as it had since 1946. And that decision, that choice to skip the dime while everything else got a makeover, actually created something collectors find fascinating today. Because here's the thing. A lot of people assume any coin dated 1976 must be a special bicentennial edition. They pull a 1976 dime out of a roll and immediately think it's rare. It's not, at least not on its own. Philadelphia struck over 568 million of them. Denver produced nearly 695 million more. That's over 1.2 billion dimes with that date. So in circulated condition, a 1976 dime is worth 10 cents. Maybe 15 cents if you're being generous. But that's only if you're looking at the surface level. Because hidden inside those billion-plus coins are varieties that have sold for nearly $3,000, and most people walk right past them. The number one thing that separates a 10-cent dime from a $1,000 dime in this year is two words: full bands. Flip your 1976 dime over and look at the reverse. You'll see a torch in the center, flanked by an olive branch on the left and an oak branch on the right. Now look closely at the torch itself. There are horizontal bands that wrap around it. On most dimes, those bands are mushy, blurred together, incomplete. That's because the dies wear down fast when you're striking over a billion coins. But on a small number of specimens, those bands are fully separated, crisp and sharp from top to bottom. That's the full bands designation, and it changes everything. A standard 1976 Philadelphia dime in MS-65 condition is worth about $6. Nice coin, but nothing life-changing. Now take that same coin and add the full bands designation. In MS-66 with full bands, that dime is sold at auction for $2,695. From $6 to nearly $2,700 just because the horizontal lines on a tiny torch are fully defined. And it gets even more interesting with Denver coins. A 1976 D-dime in MS-67 with full bands has brought $1,560 at auction. The reason these command such premiums is simple math. Out of nearly 700 million Denver dimes struck that year, finding one where the band survived the striking process in perfect condition is extraordinarily difficult. But full bands aren't the only way this coin pays. Let's talk about the errors. The 1976 dime has a solid error list that most collectors overlook. First, look for clipped planches. These happen when the blank metal disc is cut incorrectly before striking, leaving a curved or irregular edge on the finished coin. A clipped planchy 1976 dime runs anywhere from $15 to $50 depending on the size of the clip. Then there's the missing clad layer error. Remember, these dimes are supposed to be a copper core sandwiched between layers of copper nickel. Sometimes one of those outer layers fails to bond properly, and you end up with a dime that shows exposed copper on one side. It gives the coin a distinctly different color, almost a reddish-brown tone on the affected face. Those sell in the $5 to $10 range, but they're the kind of error that catches a buyer's eye instantly. Broad strikes are another one to watch for. This happens when the coin is struck outside the retaining collar, so instead of getting those clean, reeded edges, the metal spreads outward. The coin appears slightly larger and flatter than normal. A broad strike 1976 dime can bring up to $45. And then there are off-center strikes, where the die doesn't align properly with the planche. You'll see the design shifted to one side with a blank crescent on the opposite edge. Those run up to $20, and the more dramatic the shift, the more collectors will pay. Now, if you really want to chase the top of the market for this date, there's the San Francisco proof. The Mint produced just over 4 million proof dimes in 1976, all with the S Mint mark, and they were sold exclusively in collector proof sets. They were never meant for circulation. These coins are struck multiple times with specially polished dies, giving them mirror-like fields and frosted design elements. What you're looking for is the deep cameo designation, or DCAM. That means the contrast between the mirrored background and the frosted portrait of Roosevelt is sharp and dramatic. A PR70 deep cameo, meaning a flawless proof under magnification, has sold for over $1,000. And while that grade is tough to achieve, even PR69 DCAM examples trade around $15, making them an accessible entry point for collectors who want a museum-quality coin without spending a fortune. So when you're going through your dimes, don't just glance at the date and move on. If you see 1976, slow down. Check the reverse for full bands on that torch. Look at the edges for clips. Compare the color on both sides for a missing clad layer. And if you happen to have a proof set from that year sitting in a drawer somewhere, pull it out and examine that S-Mint dime under magnification. Because this coin proves that sometimes the most valuable pieces are the ones that didn't get the special treatment. While everyone was focused on the flashy bicentennial quarters and half dollars, the humble dime was quietly producing varieties worth thousands. Now let's talk about a year that most collectors walk right past. 1978. Nearly $1 billion dimes were struck that year between Philadelphia and Denver. That's a staggering number. And because of that, most people assume every single 1978 dime is worth exactly 10 cents. But here's where it gets interesting. Because the 1978 Roosevelt dime is hiding one of the most deceptive value gaps in the entire series. Let's start with what makes this coin special, and it comes down to two words: full bands. If you flip your 1978 dime over and look at the torch on the reverse, you'll see horizontal bands wrapped around it. On most 1978 dimes, those bands are mushy, blurred together, barely distinguishable. That's because the dies used in 1978 were showing serious wear during production. The strikes came out soft. And that means a 1978 dime with fully separated crisp horizontal bands is genuinely rare. How rare? The 1978 D full bands dime is ranked number 29 out of every Roosevelt dime ever made in terms of rarity. That puts it in elite company. A 1978 D in standard mint state might sell for $12, maybe $15. But add that full bands designation and suddenly you're looking at over $50 even in lower mint state grades. Now push that up to MS67 or MS68 and the numbers jump dramatically. A 1978 D-graded MS68 sold at auction for $1,187. For a dime from 1978, a coin most people wouldn't even bend down to pick up off the sidewalk. But the Philadelphia version, the one with no mint mark, that's where this story gets truly wild. Out of the nearly 664 million dimes Philadelphia struck in 1978, finding one with full bands at the highest grade levels is almost impossible. A Philadelphia 1978 dime-graded MS66 sold for $4,025, and an MS65 brought $3,910. We're talking about a coin that's less than 50 years old, made of copper and nickel, and it's selling for more than most people's car payments. And then there are the errors. The 1978 D is known for double die reverse varieties where the lettering on the back, particularly 1 dime and E pluribus unum, shows clear doubling from a misaligned hub impression. These double die reverses can bring anywhere from $50 to over $300 depending on the strength of the doubling and the coin's grade. There are also double die obverse varieties where you'll see doubling on Liberty or In God We Trust. These are the kinds of things you can only spot with a magnifying loupe, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Off-center strikes from 1978 are another treasure to hunt for. When the planche wasn't properly centered between the dies, part of the design gets cut off and you're left with a crescent of blank metal. A 1978 dime struck 50% off-center with the date still visible can bring anywhere from $150 to $400. Even a 10% off-center strike is worth $20 to $50, a massive premium on a 10-cent coin. And don't overlook broad strikes. This happens when the retaining collar fails during the striking process and the metal expands outward beyond the normal diameter. A broad strike 1978 dime looks noticeably wider and flatter than a standard dime, with the reeded edge partially or completely missing. These can sell for $100 to $500 depending on condition. So when you're going through your dimes and you hit 1978, don't just toss it back. Flip it over. Look at those torch bands under magnification. Check the lettering for any trace of doubling. Look at the overall shape. Is it perfectly round or does something look off? Because with nearly 1 billion struck that year, the sheer volume means errors slipped through. And a coin that 99% of people ignore is exactly the kind of coin that rewards the collectors who actually pay attention. Now let's talk about one of the most famous modern mint errors in the entire Roosevelt dime series. And the best part? This one was hiding in pocket change for months before anyone even noticed. In 1980, the Philadelphia Mint made a big change. For the first time ever, they started stamping the letter P on their coins to distinguish them from Denver's D mint mark. So from that point forward, every dime that came out of Philadelphia was supposed to carry a P right above the date. Every single one. But in 1982, somebody at the Mint made a mistake. A Mint employee failed to add the P mint mark to not just one, but 2 separate obverse dies. And those dies kept striking coins. Thousands and thousands of coins, all without the P that was supposed to be there. The first batch was discovered in December of 1982 when dimes without any mint mark started showing up around Sandusky, Ohio. Collectors in the area pulled between 8,000 and 10,000 pieces out of circulation. Then in August of 1983, another wave turned up around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, adding another 3,000 to 5,000 coins to the count. And here's where it gets interesting. When collectors started comparing the 2 batches, they noticed something. The earlier Sandusky finds had a strong strike, with the date clearly separated from the rim of the coin. The Pittsburgh finds had a weaker strike, with the last digit of the date sitting much closer to the rim. That difference confirmed what the experts suspected. 2 different dies were responsible. And based on the estimated life of those dies, the total mintage is believed to be somewhere around 150,000 pieces. Now that might sound like a lot, but consider this. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 519 million dimes in 1982. That means the no-P error represents less than 0.03% of the total production. A tiny fraction. And many of those 150,000 coins were spent and circulated without anyone ever looking twice. So what's it worth? In circulated condition, a confirmed 1982 no-P dime will bring you anywhere from $50 to $200. If it's uncirculated and in the MS-60 to MS-65 range, you're looking at $200 to $800. And the very finest examples, the ones graded MS-68 by PCGs, those have sold for over $2,000. The record sale was $2,185 at Heritage Auctions back in 2004. Now here's the key to identifying this coin. It's not about what you see, it's about what you don't see. A normal 1982 Philadelphia dime has a small P stamped just above the date on the obverse. On the no-P error, that space is completely blank. No mint mark at all. And if your coin has a D above the date, that's a Denver issue, not what we're looking for. The error only came from Philadelphia. Also pay attention to the strike. If the date sits clearly away from the rim, you likely have the strong variety, which is the more desirable of the two. If the last digit almost touches the rim, that's the weak variety. Both carry a premium, but the strong version tends to bring slightly higher prices. This is one of those coins that could absolutely be sitting in a jar of change right now. 150,000 were made, and not all of them have been accounted for. So next time you come across a 1982 dime, flip it over and look above the date. If there's nothing there, you might be holding a coin worth 100 times its face value. And now we arrive at the last dime on this list, and it's one that most people wouldn't think twice about. A 1996 Roosevelt dime. You'd find this in your pocket, in your car cup holder, maybe stuck between the couch cushions. It looks like nothing. But if you know what to look for, this date can be worth serious money. Let's start with the obvious. 1996 was a big year for the Roosevelt dime because it marked the 50th anniversary of the design. The U.S. Mint had been striking Roosevelt dimes since 1946, and by the time 1996 rolled around, billions of them had been produced. So on the surface, there's nothing rare about a 1996 dime. Philadelphia alone struck over 1.4 billion that year. Denver added another 1.4 billion on top of that. We're talking about nearly 3 billion dimes from a single year. But here's where it gets interesting. Because the 1996 was such a milestone year, the Mint did something special. They produced a 1996 W. Roosevelt dime struck at the West Point Mint and included it exclusively inside 1996 uncirculated mint sets. This was the first and only time a W Mint mark appeared on a Roosevelt dime. They made roughly 1.4 million of them, and they were never released into general circulation. Now, why does that matter for the coin you're holding? Because a 1996 W dime in mint state condition regularly sells for $15 to $30. That might not sound like much compared to some of the other dimes on this list, but remember, these were tucked inside mint sets that originally sold for around $8. And in top grades, MS68 or higher, a 1996 W dime can push past $2,000 at auction. There was even a specimen that hit close to $3,000 in an MS69 holder. But let's say you don't have a W mint mark. Let's say you've got a regular 1996P or a 1996D like the one you just saw. Is it still worth checking? Absolutely. Because here's the thing. Error coins don't care about mint marks. A double die, an off-center strike, a wrong planche error, those can happen at any facility in any year. And 1996 dimes have been found with notable repunched mint marks, minor double dies, and even broad strike errors where the collar failed during striking, leaving the coin slightly larger and without a defined rim. A 1996 dime struck on a wrong planche, say a cent planche, would be worth several $100s easily. If it were struck on a foreign planche or a quarter planche, you're looking at thousands. And here's one more thing to keep in mind. The condition game matters on these. A 1996P or 1996D dime in everyday circulated condition is worth 10 cents. But if you find one that somehow survived in uncirculated condition, full luster, sharp strike, clean fields, that coin in an MS67 or MS68 holder can sell for $50 to over $200. Simply because high-grade examples from circulation are genuinely scarce. Collectors want registry-quality coins, and they're willing to pay a premium for any date in top condition. So before you dismiss that 1996 dime as pocket change, flip it over, check the mint mark, look at the strike, examine the rim. Because a coin worth 10 cents to everyone else might be worth $10, $50, or even $2,000 to the right collector. And most people will never bother to check.